Another one? Is it similar to what Kelvin found?
I found 2,200.
Okay, Wishart, thank you. Thank you so much. Can you run us through, Wishart? Run us through from FAME 1, 2, 3 up to 5. What figures were you finding? Clement, did you find a different answer?
Hello, are you getting me?
We can now get you, Wishart.
Okay, what I'm saying is that the first one, the HHI is equal to 15%, which is 15 power 2, and is giving 225 plus 25%, which is 25 power 2, is giving 625 plus 30%, which is 30 power 2, is giving 900 plus 15%, which is 15% power 2, is giving 225. And then the other one also is 15%, which gives again 225. So when you sum up the 5, it gives a total figure of 2,200.
Great, fantastic. That's very correct. Thank you so much, Wishart. Did everyone find that? Did you find any challenge on those? Any challenge, Richard? I see your hand is up.
Yes, Doc. It's just that there it's saying we add the square roots on that, but then here we're squaring them.
We need to square them. Yes, we need to square. Or you followed the bullet point number 2. We're supposed to square. You square the percentages. You square the percentage and then you add. You square the percentage and then you add.
Okay.
Yeah. So now, based on what we learned, remember what we said? We said if the range, if you get the HHI that is close to 10,000, what does it mean? And if it's close to 1, what does it mean? How can you then interpret, the findings or the calculation that has been shared by Wishart? What does it tell us? Imagine this is the telecommunications subsector, telecommunications industry. What does it tell us about this type of market based on the Hashman-Havindo index that we've just computed now? So
sorry, what's the question again? Sorry.
We are told here that when you compute the index, the output or the answer can either be 10,000, it can be close to 10,000, or it can be close to 1. And we mentioned here that when the number is close to 10,000, it means that that particular industry is highly monopolistic. When it's close to 1, it indicates that a lot of equally sized market participants are having, almost equal share of the market. And this is a very competitive market. So now, based on the figures that we've gotten for the telecommunications industry, what does the HHI tell you? And that's a question.
Doc, the HHI, are you hearing me?
Yes. Go ahead, Wishart.
Yeah, the HHI of 2,200 is actually, it tells us that the market is moderately concentrated, meaning the firms hold a significant share of the market. But of course, competition still exists.
Great. Thank you so much, Wishart. Kelvin, what's your take?
So from what you've explained, Doc, 2,000 is closer to 1 as compared to 10,000. So I'm now getting a bit confused with Mr. Wishart saying it's fair, or maybe I'm failing to understand this, because from my end, if it's closer to 1, which means there's fair competition. I don't know. I might need more clarity on that one.
Good point, Kelvin. Wisha, did you hear what he said? I'll let you answer.
Yes, I heard what he said, and I still stand on my point, because what I'm saying is that it is actually moderately. It's not highly concentrated in terms of competition, but it is just moderately concentrated, and of course competition exists. That's what I would put it.
Mm-hmm. Wait, no. So Kelvin, did you hear that? Kenny, can you please mute your gadget? I hope you got that, Kelvin. So I want you to try something.
Just
Let's do 2 firms. Try and calculate for 2 firms. You square the percentages. We say firm 1 has got 90% and firm 2 has got 10%. What's your HHR?
Come again, you said firm 1 has what?
Firm 1 has got 90% and firm 2 has got 10%. What's your HHR? I don't know. Somebody, Kelvin, is it Kenny?
10,000.
Kenny Piri, can you please mute your mic?
It's 10,000. So.
You found 10,000?
Yes.
Did everyone find that number?
I got 82. 8,200.
Yeah, I got 82 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. I think I'm correct. Yes, it's 82.
It is actually 82,000. Yeah.
82.
So now I want, what is it telling us here? So this number is now very close to 10,000. You've seen. So it depends on the numbers and the number of participating firms in your calculation. And so when we're getting closer to, when we're leaning closer to the 1, it means there is a bit of moderate competition, because the different market players all have some share, which is not so different from the other ones that are participating. But when it's very close to 10,000, what it's basically telling you is that it's a monopolistic market, because only 1 or 2 firms have the largest share of that market. And what does it tell you from an economic perspective? It's basically telling you that that is a very controlled market, and you need, a very structured investment plan that will allow you to penetrate that market and to compete with that larger share. I don't know. Somebody is. Can somebody please ask Kelvin Peary to mute their gadget?
Doc, it's actually Kenny, not Kelvin.
Sorry. Sorry, it's Kenny Peary, yes. Okay, so what is coming out of the index is very, very useful information. Now, in practice, the kind of challenges that you're going to face, are that how do you actually understand, the market share of each firm? And so you have to really go in terms of conducting detailed market assessments, and these market assessments depend on the firm itself, and so the firm has to be willing to give out information. And sometimes, firms are not don't easily give out information in terms of, for example, their market share or the market coverage, and sometimes the informality of the sector can limit your access to information, because sometimes when we live, for example, in a digital era now, where most of the we're dealing with digital money, so it's important to keep a track record of what's happening where, the volume of transactions in a particular sector or industry, and who takes up the larger share. And so in highly advanced markets, it's important, it's easy for such information to be picked up. But in developing markets like Zambia, you find that where more than 60-70% of the of an industry is highly informal, it becomes very, very difficult for you to collect this information. So it's really important that you check your sources for information, and then you now understand. And the practical example I can look at now is, I think I talked about Mikalile even the last time. Mikalile expanded into the agri-food, into the food subsector. They were mainly in household items initially. So how did they, segregate the market? Because you have to differentiate your product offering based on the clientele or your target market. Are you targeting the low-income earners? Are you targeting the middle class? Or are you targeting the premium clients, which is the high class? And Zambia, for example, Zambia has got like a rising middle class. This is the category that a lot of economists would define as the consumption-rich category, when a person feels they have enough disposable income and they can now engage in the purchase of premium products, even if their financial base is not yet strong. And so if you have an economy that has got a rising middle class, you see a lot of consumption expenditure rather than investment.
Doc, sorry to cut you short. I don't know if it's from my end, but you're breaking.
Am I breaking for everyone?
No, it's from his end.
No, it's from his end, I think.
Sorry, Kelvin. Maybe try and rejoin, or maybe check your connectivity. So like I was saying, the middle class, the rising middle class in an economy like Zambia, you find that there are certain economies that have, advanced to high income status because the culture, the consumption patterns and the consumption expenditure among the middle class has been influenced towards investment rather than consumption. And so they say you can only save. There's a lot of economic theories that talk about saving as a prerequisite for investment. You can only invest when you save. But the key point to note there is that savings can only start when you raise your level of disposable income. So if you have disposable income, your passive income, then you can now begin to allocate it towards saving. And then after you save, you can now do an investment. So this is really something that you look at. And from a company's perspective, if you look at the supply side, we'll look at things like conspicuous consumption later on. When we look at consumer behavior, the income propensity to consume as well, where a person is said to increase their level of expending the moment their level of income goes up. If you never used to afford living in a particular location, because you get a better job, then you move to, a better location according to status or according to what society considers to be trendy or something that is only for the elite or premium clients. So consumer behavior also has got a science that explains consumption patterns. But from a firm perspective, your job is to exploit those, consumption patterns that you observe in a particular market. So if you are introducing a new product, the branding and the marketing that comes with it is to stimulate people to consume that product as much as possible. For example, look at how the electronic companies that make all these different brands that we have for the phones, and also in the automobile industry, like for the vehicles as well. You find that, a new product, for example, we have iPhone 17 out, it will only be in fashion for less than a year. And, when you still have time to use that particular phone to maximize the utility, another version is going to come out, and then you're going to be compelled to upgrade. And so all these are different things where the firms exploit market tendencies or consumption patterns for consumers to be able to ensure that their products are in demand. And so these are things that we look at from a market perspective, understanding how to maintain your market dominance. And so, you know, producers like Apple, they've been trending for a long time. Somebody will ask you to say, why did Nokia at some point, Nokia, the BlackBerry, those were very promising brands when you look at the mobile network producers, in terms of the producers of mobile phones. But at some point they went down. And you can, when you dig deeper, you find that there's very specific things that they did not do. You know, maybe they failed to evolve with the market and the new ones came on board. And we're seeing, for example, now Apple dominating the sector. And we see the competition between Android and Apple, like where you look at Samsung, for instance, and Apple in terms of the functionalities as well as the quality of the phones that they're producing. All these are anchored on understanding consumer behavior in order to maintain market dominance. So just for you to understand, you know, the link between the two. Okay, now let's go to the issue of market share, which conceptually I know you already understand based on the example that we just did now. And so in economics, a market is a place where buyers and sellers are exchanging goods and services with the following considerations. And so you look at things like the types of goods and services being traded, the number and size of buyers and sellers in the market, and the degree to which information can flow freely. The concept of information asymmetry is something that is an important topic in economics, because when there is a mismatch in terms of the information coming from sellers and what the buyers know, there might be, you know, losses that may accrue on the side of the sellers, as well as utility that is lost on the side of buyers. And so as a buyer, you only be able to make an informed decision whether or not you're getting value for money for the product that you're buying, if you understand also the price of alternative products as well as the quality. So if I'm going to buy a car, I want to buy a BMW, or I want to buy a Toyota Crown. Before I can be convinced in my heart that I've gotten the value for my money, I first of all need to look at, okay, if I'm looking at a Benz, I'm looking at a BMW, what value or what is the quality of the competitor? So if I'm equating, for example, BMW, Volvo as competitors of the Benz, then I need to have a feel of what those other markets offer for me to be convinced that what I'm getting is high value for money. And in economics later on, when we look at consumer behavior, we also look at sometimes how loyalty to brands can actually also be a market strategy that other companies also use to maintain a certain level of prestige, not really utility. And so all those are different considerations that you look at when you're looking at market share. So now there are two types of market structures. So we are looking at, and this is, you know, some of the basic principles of microeconomics. We're looking at perfect or pure market, and then we're also looking at imperfect market. After we look at these two types of markets, we're now going to get to a point where we look at the importance of regulation. And so when you look at, for example, the regulations that are put in place by the government in terms of taxes, in terms of policies that compel certain industries to operate in a particular manner, all of it is coming back to the issue of market failure. And so if you write these two concepts in your notebook right now, perfect or imperfect market, and then we look at a perfect market. I use the word market failure because it will help us understand, these two concepts in much greater detail. So they say when a market has failed, if the market players are not operating under fair competition, it means that we're seeing some elements of market failure. And that market failure has to be managed somehow, either by the state or through the regulations and the laws, that have been put in place. So when we look at a perfect or pure market, we're looking at where we have many buyers and sellers in a particular market. And, the firms are selling an identical product. It's homogeneous, and it's easy for those many buyers and sellers to have good competition because the product is identical and the consumer is not that is not compounded by the fact that they have to compare, they have to make a lot of choices based on the product quality. So if it's Millimil, the brand is the same, the quality is the same, and so the buyers know that whether I buy this brand or that brand, I'll still get the same, level of utility. And then there's free entry and exit of the firms. And so the firms can easily enter the market and they can come out. There is also perfect information that is available for buyers as well as sellers. Individual firms are price takers. They cannot influence the market price. So price takers because the consumers have got so many options of how to buy. And so the firms are basically taking the price. They are not price setters, but they are getting the price. So now this kind of market is not practical. Of course, it's a pure and it's a perfect market. But what we find in the real world is that we find an imperfect market. Now, the imperfect market we find in the real world is where one or few firms have the market power. They dominate, and the products may be differentiated. They may be differentiated by branding, quality, or even the level of advertising. So there are certain firms that have got the muscle to reach even a bigger scope of the market because they have the financial capacity to engage in marketing. So they can influence a lot in terms of the consumer awareness and also, compel those people to buy their product. So in an imperfect market, you find that there is also barriers to entry. So the barriers to entry may exist. And an example we are looking at here is, for instance, if you compare the agriculture subsector and the mining subsector. In the agriculture subsector, you find that the barriers to entry may be minimal because you can start with very little investment, provided you have land, and given the geo land tenure system that we have in Zambia, you find that a lot of the rural population, they have access to land, and so they just need basic tools for them to start. But if you want to go in the mining subsector, the barriers to entry are quite high in terms of the initial capital investment and the regulation that's around it. And so in an imperfect market, you find that those things exist, on the ground. And in an imperfect market, because remember we said that a few firms may have market power, firms have some control over the prices because, there might be cases of collusion where firm A and firm B say, okay, we have these products, like for example, me, I'll focus on selling scratch cards. You focus on selling the digital airtime. But then we'll keep the price the same, So they may collude, but then that is influencing the market forces, where demand and supply dynamics should be the ones that are dictating the price. And then information may be incomplete or unequal. That information asymmetry I talked about, where sometimes the consumers may not have full information. They may be buying a more expensive product of low quality, because they don't know that an alternative, better quality and low price, commodity is available somewhere else. So these are examples of what you see between a perfect or pure market and an imperfect. And so the ideal one is the perfect market, but this does not exist in the real world. What we find in the real world is an imperfect market. And all these things I talked about, like, for example, the barriers to entry in a market, unequal access to information, all these are what we now call market failures, where, for example, a few firms have got control over the price. How does then the state come in to control market failure? The state can come in to control market failure by correcting these same things that we talked about. Just for a moment. Yeah, so the state can control market failure by doing quite a lot of things. It can be to control the dominance that bigger firms have. So in controlling the dominance that bigger firms have, the state may impose taxes on goods that have got negative externalities. In this case, we're talking about things like tobacco, alcohol, and also things that would pollute the environment. Nowadays, there's a push towards clean energy, even when we look at the automobile subsector for vehicles. The government could put in incentives that promote green and clean energy, like, electric cars. And so they may reduce the import duty on electric vehicles to promote people or to ensure that consumers are able to access, to afford to procure such kind of goods, because these goods are, are considered ideal. On the consumer side, when you talk about a market, access is determined by the level of affordability. And so if, for example, an essential commodity like fuel, electricity is being provided, and the players within that subsector have got dominance and control, they are price setters. The state can come in to cushion the consumer through subsidies. And so they may subsidize part of the price. And I think we've heard these conversations coming, for example, from the politicians, where they talk about, no, we need to ensure that consumers are buying market rate fuel prices. And so when the price become too exploitative for the common Zambia or for the common person within that particular country to afford, then a subsidy may actually be important, especially if it's an important investment good. When we look at things like electricity and fuel. And so the government can provide subsidies for goods with positive externalities. So it may be things like education, health, energy, fuel, to encourage greater production and consumption among, the people within the population. The state may also come in with regulation and, specific laws that are going to protect the local industry. So I'll give you an example of Zambia, for example. When you look at companies like Parmalat, Parmalat was active in Zambia for some time. They closed, it was sold to a company called Lactalis. And I think now it's Dairy Gold that is dominating the dairy subsector in Zambia. So when you look at the aggregate figures, Zambia is a net importer of dairy products. We import close to 2 million metric tons of dairy products on an annual basis. Now, for the local companies here, a number of them have gone out of business because of the threat that comes with the importation of cheap milk imports. So instead of a company investing in a value chain that allows them to collect milk from producers that are dotted around the country, it's cheaper for them to just import from East Africa, countries like Kenya, and they can import even milk powder, which they can reconstitute here, repackage and sell, in the local markets here. So what that does is that it will crowd out the indigenous dairy enterprises here because of the threat of the cheap imports that are coming from outside. So in order to protect the local industry, the government may, introduce quotas in terms of, the amount of milk that may be imported to compel the local milk, processors to buy a larger share of the milk from the local producers within the country. So this could be an example in terms of how, regulation as well as laws can be used to correct certain market failures, because that also becomes a market failure when companies find it cheaper to import rather than to buy locally. So these are examples, that can be used to be able to do that. And there are several others. So just for you to have it at the back of your head that a perfect market does not exist. What we find in the real world is an imperfect market with a lot of market failures. And so market failures are things that are going to affect the competition in the provision of certain goods and services among, the participating firms, as well as the flow of information between buyers and sellers. And so these issues to do with market failure is what really we have to manage from a macroeconomic perspective. The state will come in with all these different interventions that I've talked about now to try and correct that particular situation moving forward. Okay, so I've explained the concept of a perfect market, and these are the points that I shared with you. And I'll share these slides, and then you can have time to go into these in a greater detail. So now, when we go into an imperfect market, we can now narrow it down a little bit to go into now the different definitions of what would make an imperfect, market. So we have the different things like a monopoly, oligopoly, as well as monopolistic competition. So I'm sure for the colleagues that have got economics background, these are basic concepts. So when we look at, for example, a monopoly, we're looking at where one seller dominates the entire market. There's only one. And we see practically, you may look at a company like Zesco. Of course, now we have several others that have come on board. But a few years ago, we only had Zesco that was, dominating the provision of hydroelectric power and retailing it to all the consumers within the country. So under a monopoly, you have one seller that dominates the market, and there is no substitutes for the products that are there. And there are also high barriers to entry. So you find that the level of investment that goes in the provision of hydroelectric power requires a huge capital investment. And only, for example, a state-run company like Zesco would find it easy a few years ago to be the ones to set it up. And so there are high barriers to entry. And then the firm is a price maker. They set the price. And consumers have no control because they don't have an alternative. If they don't buy from this one firm, they can't go anywhere else. Such, a system is very exploitative to the buyer, and the state usually should now come in to try and correct it. It's also a form of market failure. When we go to the other one, which is an oligopoly, in an oligopoly, we have a few firms that dominate the market. And these firms, they are interdependent, and the decision of one firm will affect the others. And so And I think we had a similar case when it comes to the MNOs in Zambia, because we had three at some point dominating, and to a large extent, they're still the ones who are dominating. So you find that when Airtel increases their prices, the other ones will tend to follow suit as well, especially if Airtel has got a larger market share. And so oligopoly also is a bit exploitative, and there's some elements of collusion. So which is why now consumer protection becomes important to try and protect that particular market. And then the barriers to entry are also quite high, and the competition may occur, only when it comes to things like the price or the level of advertising. So maybe one firm may advertise more than the other, or maybe even the quality of the product that is being offered. And then now we go to the monopolistic competition. So under the monopolistic competition, we have where many sellers offer similar but differentiated products. So they may compete by looking at things like branding, quality, and advertising. So for example, you look at the milling companies that we have in Zambia. There are quite a number of them. They have a similar product, which is milling mill, but then they're different brands. And so you look at a brand like Choma Milling, National Milling, and a few others that have come up, recently. And the barriers to entry are not restrictive; they're quite free, so firms can go in and come out. And the firms have some control; they have some control over the price, And we have a much deeper example, which would go to things like, people who operate barber shops, saloons, restaurants. They're all providing food, but under different brands, and they can maintain that competition based on the quality of what they're producing and giving, to the producers. I mean, what they have for the consumers. So just to summarize it for you, in a monopoly, we're looking at one seller. In an oligopoly, we're looking at a few large sellers. And then in monopolistic competition, we're looking at many sellers with differentiated products. So this is what you find in an imperfect market when you go on the ground. Okay, now I gave you this example already. So now just to give you the categorization for the HHI index, if you have an HHI that is less than 1,500, it is considered to be a competitive marketplace. Just these figures, you can take a picture or a screenshot. It helps you understand how to interpret the results of the index once you compute it. Okay, so now we move to another ratio, which is the market concentration ratio. So the market concentration ratio is calculated as follows. So where we look at, for instance, what you're seeing on the slide, the concentration ratio, the CN in this formula, we're looking at the market share of the 9th largest firm in an industry as a percentage of the total industry market share. And then the N defines the number of firms included in the concentration ratio calculation. And so the CR4 and the CR8 concentration ratios are commonly used. And then concentration ratios show the extent of the largest firm's market share in a given industry. So I want us to look at, I have a slide with an example. Let me just find it for you, just wait. So in this particular formula, you are just basically looking at, you want to measure the combined market share of the largest firms in an industry, of the largest firms. And so when you, for example, know the percentages, the first thing you want to do is that you're saying, okay, like in the example of the 5 that I gave you, you get the 3 highest numbers. So that's what you want to look at, the market concentration ratio. And this will show you how much of the market is controlled by the top firms. So that's a difference with the when you're looking at the market concentration ratio. And so in this formula, the one I'm showing, the CRN is the concentration ratio for the largest firms. So you need to have information of those largest firms by their percentage share once you have those percentages. And then the C1 is the market share of the largest firm. C2 is the market share of the second largest firm. And then CN, so you can add. You see where we're saying C1, C2, C3, you can continue adding if they're 3, if they're 4, if they're 5. So that's why there's those dots that you can see in the formula. And then CN is the market share of the 9th largest firm, assuming, because most of these calculations will be given, you have several firms that you have in that particular firm. And then N is the number of firms included in the calculation. So if you included 4, then it will be 4. If you included 10, then it's going to be 10. Okay? So after that is done, you rank the firms from you start by ranking the firms from the largest to the smallest based on the market share. And then the second thing that you do in computing this formula is that you select the top firms, which is the ones that have got the largest share. And then you add their market share together, those ones, the top firms. So I want us to think of an example. And again, can you get your pens and your papers? We think of several firms in the market. And so we're thinking of firm 1. Firm 1 has got 40% share. Firm 2 has got 25% share. Firm 3 has got 15% share. Firm 4 has got 10% share. And then maybe we just combine the others, because maybe these are the big numbers. And then we just say others have got, 10% share.
Doc, kindly run through those numbers.
Okay, so firm 1, 40%. Firm 2, 25%. Firm 3, 15%. Firm 4, 10%. And then others are 10%. So in this case, we are doing the market concentration ratio for 4 firms, because we have the 4. They are the ones we're saying are the ones with the largest share. So our formula then is going to start where it says CRN, you add the number of firms. So the N here is going to be CR4. So CR4, let's add. So I'll let you add now. So the CR4 is going to be equal to what?
Please come again on the CR4.
90.
90.
That's correct. Could you explain how you got that? Who was that?
It's Richard here.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just adding up the first 4 percentages.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes. That's it. So adding up the first four percentages, which is 40 plus 25 plus 15 plus 10. So the principle is understanding why you're doing this, right? Because the market concentration ratio, you want to understand the share of the market that is controlled by the largest firms in that particular market. So in the example I gave you like the first four large, the first four firms and their share of the market. And so firm 1, 40, firm 2, 25, firm 3, 15, firm 4, 10. And then the rest of the companies, of the firms within that particular market own 10%. And so
I'm sorry, sir, why are we not adding the share for other firms? Because the fourth firm has 10% as well as the others.
So others, remember, it's a combined. I said it's a combined share for the other firms. But what you want to find out from, sorry?
I get it. So it's smaller for them because 10 is for like a number of firms,
A number of firms, yes. A number of firms, yes. So what you want to find out from the market concentration ratio, you want to find out, the share for those top large firms. Remember, did you take note of the steps in computing the market concentration ratio? So the first thing that you need to do is to rank the firms, from the largest to the smallest based on the percentage share of that market. So in an exam question, you may be given that information with the market share. So that's the first part. And then the second one, you select the top firms that have got the highest number in terms of market share. So you select, and it's up to you, depending on the number of firms that you have. You may do 4, 8, 16, it may go according to that number. But, you have to now indicate, if you're calculating for 4 firms, it will mean it to be CR4, and then is equals to, then you add, those different percentage shares. And the answer that you're going to get is going to give you an indication that those 4 firms that, like in this particular case, we're saying that the 4 firms that are controlling this market control 90% of the market share, which, indicates a highly concentrated market. And so you have few firms controlling that market and very few, and the majority of the firms, the others that control 10%, only control 10% of the market. So that's the point. So the higher the concentration ratio, the greater the market power of the largest firms, and the lower the level of competition. So if you have if the figure was lower for the top firms, it means that the largest firms don't have a larger share and there is more competition. And the opposite is also going to be true. Is it clear for everyone on this, on how to compute the market concentration ratio? Great, thanks. I want someone using their own words to explain the difference between the market concentration ratio and having the Hashman index, just using their own words. Anyone?
I can give it a try.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. What I've understood is that for the HH index, it also compares the market and the market share for firms. But the difference with concentration market, that one, it looks at the larger firms, whereas with the HH, it's all the firms that are in the market.
Great. Well, thank you. Kashia, is that your name?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Anyone else to add?
Hello, Doc.
Yes, go ahead, Joseph. Is it Joseph?
Yes, sir. Just try according to what you've learned. HH index, when calculating the market shares or concentration, you square the market share. You square them and you add them up. But with this one for market concentration ratio, you don't square, but you just add according to the number of firms you have been specified to account for. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for bringing out the angle of how the two are computed, the difference between the HHI as well as the market concentration. And so the kind of information that, both will give you is different, and they serve different purposes, right? So obviously, when you're looking at the market concentration ratio, you are looking at, the extent to which the top firms within the market, the share of the market that the top firms hold within a particular market. And as a business owner, you want to know, okay, so if I'm going in this market, like the example that we did now, if I'm going in this market, I need to compete against 4 firms. Those 4 firms are holding 90% of the entire market share. So your investment strategy and your approach and your plan has to factor that in, because you really have to invest quite a bit to compete with those 4 large firms that are controlling 90% of the market. And this is information also captured differently when you look at the HHI. The HHI looks at the level of market concentration. You're looking at whether it's got monopolistic tendencies or not. And in that particular case, for the HHI, you have a much broader perspective because you're looking at all the firms. But for the market concentration ratio, you're only looking at the top, the top firms that are dominating the market. Isaac, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Doc. Good afternoon, colleagues. Mine is just a short one. I just wanted to find out how are market shares obtained, the figures, how are they obtained? If I'm to go in a particular market and I would want to know whom I'm going to compete with, so how do I get those figures to get to understand the competitors?
Very, very good question there. I think I touched a little bit on this in terms of the challenges that come with obtaining market data. Can anyone try and answer, reflecting on what I mentioned earlier? That's a good question that he raises. Is there anyone who can take it up? Okay, so this is a common challenge, like I mentioned earlier, especially in developing markets. And so developing markets where you have, institutions that are highly informal. And when you look at, for example, the trading subsector, you find that more than 60–70% is all informal. So tracking transactions becomes a challenge. But in advanced markets, like in Europe, America, you find that most of the transactions are digital and they can be traced. And then you have what we call industry associations, commodity associations, or industry apex organizations, whose job is to compute such figures that is important for would-be investors. So even in Zambia, these ones do exist. When you go into the different players, for example, the industry associations like Manufacturing Association of Zambia, you have Dairy Association of Zambia. These are different institutions that can tell you, for example, this is the way the market for this particular commodity looks like, and these are the key players. And so when collecting information, it's a combination of both secondary data, like coming from published information and statistics that will come from government, government systems, industry associations, as well as financial institutions. And so such information can come out from those, but it should also be combined with primary data that you collect on your own, depending on how granular you want your data to be. And so you can do a market assessment that is informed by secondary data coming from already published reports and statistics in a particular subsector. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, somehow, because I was just trying to bring in the idea of application, since we're doing masters, and now it's more of application in real life and in real business. So that's why I thought of asking, so that we could. So in this case, it means because it's kind of difficult, it means you need to do your own research. Maybe have foot soldiers get on the ground to just maybe make inquiries from retailers to gather data, and then based on that data, then you come and compute.
Yes, it's a combination of both. So you have information that is already available based on these sources that I mentioned earlier, and you may also collect your own primary data to ensure that you have an informed assessment of the market dynamics. Wishat, I saw your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to contribute a bit on the market share. Are you hearing me, Doctor?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, just giving an example in the firm I worked for. I was working for an agriculture firm, and we were about 5 players. Those are companies, about 5 of us. So in order to actually determine this agriculture firm, normally we talk about selling inputs. These are seed, selling seed to farmers, and of course chemicals and so on. So our determinant for market share mostly was the seed itself, the seed sale. So we could come up with the number of seeds sold per company as total, and then we calculate the percentage of what we have sold as a company there to determine the market share. That's what I wanted to contribute.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for that contribution, Wishat. And the important thing for you to note is that you need to, all the information that, the flow, the volume of transactions that relate to your commodity, it has to be within the purview of what you can see when you are computing market share. So it's important for you to have your own records, but how do your own records compare with what the others are doing? Where the number of firms are known, it becomes easier. But for larger markets where there's so many firms that are participating, the only logical way will be to also rely on, centrally controlled data So like earlier on, I gave you an example of how, you know, the whole issue of digitization has really helped in managing high volumes of transactions by themes. And so if you notice now, for example, even financial institutions, they are being compelled to record the nature and the type of transaction that you're doing. All that is also meant to help to collect information about, you know, what sort of transactions are you paying towards, and such information can be aggregated and analyzed at a broader level. So it's a combination of information of such nature, as well as information that you collect at the firm level that will help you really compute in terms of what you're doing. It's also possible from a research perspective that you can analyze your data purely from secondary data, if at all that information is there and is available. If it's not complete, and usually that's the kind of challenge that you find that most of the available information is too generic. So it doesn't go to the details. So if, for example, you're only interested in Lusaka, Chivombo, and Chongwe, you may find information that will give you statistics at national level, but you want to narrow it down to those particular districts. So you may use the national level data to give you an idea, but then collect your own information in those 3 districts. And then you also compare it with the national trends to see if it's able to compare. And if there are any differences, what are those telling you? And how can that help you make a more informed decision about investment? And so these are some of the challenges that you find. And from a research perspective, these are the skills that you need to have also at this level, at master's level. Because in any paper that you're going to produce, we basically look at 2 things. We look at internal and external validity. So internal validity is basically looking at the way you frame your hypothesis. Did your independent variable, did the independent variable and dependent variable affect each other in ways that you had anticipated? So is it cause and effect? Is it correlation? And so you look at that from the internal validity perspective. But also what's important in research is the external validity. So the extent to which you can generalize the results that you've gathered from the information that you've collected to a larger part of the population. So in this case, you're looking at obviously the adequacy of your sample, you know, and the sampling method itself that was used to allow you to be able to rely on the information that you've collected for you to make informed decision. And so calculations that you're doing from the economic perspective need you to have the skills to also collect data that can be relied upon, so that when you compute those things, you can apply them. And nobody will tell you, and happy for the colleague that brought in the issue of the application. Nobody's going to tell you to say, do it this way. It's now you applying what you learned in class to be able to solve an issue. So they tell you, okay, we want to understand market share here. What are the dynamics? How do we collect the data? So you're going to now come up with a data collection plan that encompasses all these different things that we've just talked about in class today. Okay. I hope Isaac and Wishard, you guys are okay now. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for those contributions. Any other question from anyone? Otherwise, then we end today's class here. And Richard, when is our next class? Is Richard connected?
Yes, I am.
When is our next class?
It's tomorrow at 11.
Oh, it's Clement, sorry. Yeah, it's Clement. Clement is the... I mixed up the names. Clement, it's tomorrow what time?
At 11.
Okay. I'm sure Richard was like, why is he calling my name? What have I done? Okay, colleagues, thank you so much. For me, I believe in simplicity. When you are teaching, if the things are not, if you're not able to get what I'm saying, it means you're not learning. And so everything that we do has to be, you have to practice, it has to make sense conceptually in your head. Because when things make sense conceptually in your head, then you can apply them. And that's the whole essence of education. Okay, so I'm going to share the slides of what has been covered so far, and you can go through. Thank you so much, colleagues, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you.